Hey guys, welcome back. Today's our fourth installment of the RepPath Leadership Podcast series. I'm very excited to be hosting this again. My name is Joe Licata. For some of you guys that haven't joined any of the podcasts in the past, I'm the owner and founder of RepPath. The goal of this series is to speak with leaders across the country that are in medical sales that can provide their true insight of what it takes to be successful and what their experiences are in this industry. So you guys get a real glimpse of what goes on behind the curtain, and not just reading other. I know some podcasts out there, they try to be a little friendlier, give you all the bright good stuff, the good side of medical sales. But this is something that we want to be very truthful and honest. The good, the bad, the ugly, so you get a real understanding of what it's like to join this. It's an awesome industry, but it comes with a lot of challenges. And before I introduce my guest today, I just want to set a reminder to you guys. Our producer James, he's going to be fielding questions. So from this moment on, any questions, any thoughts, comments, please just shoot it into the chat. James will keep those on file, and then at about a half hour in, we're gonna take a little break and field some of those questions, which our guests will answer. And if I can help, I'll help address them. So please don't be shy. Ask whatever you want to ask. Any thoughts? It could be a little off topic. That's fine. And then also, in the meantime, if you want a copy and be able to view this podcast, please subscribe to my YouTube channel, which is Unfiltered Medical Sales Coaching, so you guys can get access to this and any other material that we produce. So without further ado, very excited today. I have a special guest, Jason Bazemore, who is the regional sales manager at CTM Biomedical. And Jason, excited to have you here. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Thank you. So, Jason, just before we start, if you could give a little bit of your background, walk us through, your history in the medical sales industry and where you're at today.
Sure. I've been in the business for probably 25 plus years. Started out, my first job in sales was selling yellow pages a long, long time ago. And, knocking on 50, 60 doors a day and, really beating the streets. I broke into medical sales with Stryker, selling total joints and trauma products. And then after that, I've worked in several orthopedic companies, worked for some biologic companies, went over to spine about 14, 15 years ago, spent the last 14, 15 years on the spine side, really feeling my way out. Worked upper middle management, have been a VP of sales and marketing. And, for me, I think a lot of it was really just figuring out where things settled and where my best role was. And I found that I do very well in startup companies where I wear a lot of hats. You kind of have to be a chameleon. You're, handling a lot of roles. But for me, I enjoy that because it's led me to have a very well-rounded career. And I feel like I've got a good skill set because of that versus just kind of being a cog in the wheel at a larger company.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So just to back up a bit, because today's topic is breaking into medical sales and the distribution model. So
Yep.
if you can walk us through, I know you touched on it a little bit, that selling yellow pages, but what actually, inspired you to, pique an interest to get into this industry? And how, because I get this every day, Joe, how can I break in? So
Yeah.
how did you break in?
So it's funny. My mom used to always tell a story saying I was meant to be in sales because when I was in kindergarten, I was taking my older brother's toys to school and selling them to kids.
I love it.
But as far as medical goes, always was keenly interested, had done exercise physiology in college and had an interest. I was an athlete. I've had a lot of athletic injuries over the course of my career as an athlete. So it was a big interest of mine. And my brother was in pharmaceuticals and one of his friends was in medical device. And early on, I got to have a conversation with the two of them and hear them going back and forth at each other where, the med device guy was teasing my brother, you're like the redheaded stepchild of the business because you sell pharmaceuticals. And my brother went back at him. And I just listened to both of them. And I was like, I want to be part of this. That sounds like a club that I want to join. And, I looked into how to get into medical device sales. And for me, it was have some B2B background, some sales experience so I could show that I've sold something. And, this is going back longer than I'd like to admit, 25 years ago, have some sort of sales experience. And then I think one of the things I realized was you can't be picky. When you're trying to get in, you might have the idea of what a perfect job is. The reality is you take what you can get and then kind of get your experience and then grow from there.
Yeah, and that's a great point because I hear that all the time. Like, Joe, I want to be in, but I don't want pharma. I want to be in med device, but I don't want to be in the OR. I want to
Yep.
sell and sell and sell. And let's be real, everybody wants a lot of the similar things. They want their cake and eat it too, and you just can't be picky with the amount of competition out there. So, it's
It's
very
true.
valid.
And I look at doctors, right? When they go into their residency program, they don't know what they're going to specialize in until they've had exposure to a little bit of everything. We're not that dissimilar. When we go out and we start selling, you might find you love being in the OR. You might find you do really well with the administrative or the C-suite at the hospitals. You may develop a really strong clinical acumen. You may be stronger suited on the business or the marketing or product management side. I think you have to have a few roles before you really find out, what your ism is.
And you know, getting back to that, when you were starting out, is there anything that you wish you knew then that you learned over the years that now that you wish you would have changed?
To be a better listener.
Okay.
I'd say categorically to be a better listener. When we first get into the business, we want to prove that we're learning, right? And we're so hungry and aggressive, and you learn a little pearl and unfortunately, you want to vomit that pearl on everybody and do the product dump. And here's what I've got. And here's what marketing told me to tell you. The reality is asking questions and just listening and genuinely listening and genuinely asking questions, not asking it because somebody told me I need to ask these questions, but I want to understand the answer and find out, is there a pain point here? Is there something that we can connect on? Do I have a solution? And if I don't, I have to be willing to walk away or maybe point you in the direction of somebody that does have a better solution for what your needs are and understand the long play that's going to open up the door for me later to come back and revisit you.
But and on to that point of listening, because I get pushback sometimes, when I have other sales leaders that, I coach some of their reps,
Yep.
that, again, they hire me for my services, which is great. But again, I'm going to teach them the way that things that help me. And sometimes it's not going to be something that management is going to agree with.
Yep.
How do you feel about, especially that first sales call? You get a lunch or a meeting with Dr. Jones, whoever it is, and forcing yourself not to talk about your product. That's one of the things I try to push because it's uncomfortable because you
It
want to
is.
spit it out. But what are your thoughts on that approach for just the first call?
I think it's a great approach. Honestly, we tend to do that. I'll dump out my bag of goodies on the table and tell me which one of these you want to use. I think you're better served. Information is easy to get today with technology, but sit down and ask about the practice. Hey doc, what is it you're focusing on? Obviously you've got this wonderful practice, what led you here? What are your focuses on your practice? And, if it's orthopedics, are you into robotics? How is AI affecting your practice? What are the different things that you do? I've always liked to have that. I call it my kind of ace up my sleeve. I'll know something about their practice that they're into that has nothing to do with my business. And I ask them about that so we can have a safe conversation. Like, hey doc, full disclosure, I have nothing to sell you here, so I can't sell anything in regards to this, but help me understand, what are your thoughts on this, And AI and robotics has been one of those that I think it's a hot topic guys like to talk about. They tend to feel strongly one way or the other. And now, you're conversational, you're a little bit safer. And then when you're all ready to talk products, I think it's going to open the door.
Okay. And what are some of the skills besides listening that young reps today, or even individuals that are just looking for their next career move, that when reps are coming in there, obviously you're looking for an active listener, but are there any other skills that really stand out for you that make a great candidate?
I think questioning as well, right? Asking lots of questions, probing questions, things that you can dig down on, really finding out, is there a pain point there that you're going to have some access to a sale? And is there not? And then ethically doing the right thing, right? Maybe my product's not the best suited for what your need is. I can point in the direction of whose is.
Okay. And so someone trying to land their first role, what's the advice you would give them, jumping in today? I just graduated from, Penn State University. I really want to get into medical sales because this is a
Yep.
typical candidate that I get every week, multiple times a week. They have a good understanding. They've spoken to a couple of reps out there. They might have an uncle or an aunt that is in medical sales. You know, honest feedback. What would you tell them?
You know, medical sales college has been one avenue that a lot of people have used to sort of get that OR experience and exposure. And it's been good for a lot of people. Um, I would say for me, it's, again, I go back to don't being picky. You're going to find out what your sweet spot is and where you want to specialize. But in the meantime, just get a foot in the door somewhere. And once you're there, then you're going to be able to prove yourself and learn, right? You're learning and developing and figure out where you're going to fit into the industry. But getting that foot in the door, and you can't have pride, you can't have an ego. It doesn't matter if you come in as a junior rep for somebody and you thought you were going to be the star sales rep, but maybe you come in as an associate or a junior and you're learning underneath somebody, which means really you're going to be their mule for the next 18 months, and you're going to be gophering equipment all around and doing all the work that they don't want to do. But you're going to learn some really invaluable stuff over the course of that 18 months where you feel like you're doing a lot of stuff you don't want to do.
Okay. And now, because that point I definitely want to dig a little deeper into. So, we're gonna jump around a little bit,
Yeah.
but because you brought up a good point, with being a mule. So these entry level reps that are breaking in, and distribution is a great avenue, and tell me if you disagree, for a
Yeah.
lot of these reps to get their foot in the door and can have a fantastic career. So a lot of reps, they have the misperception, and again, tell me if I'm wrong, that they're going to get out there, they're going to be given a territory, they're going to be covering cases, they're going to be selling, selling, selling. Give me the reality of day one, the first 6, 9 months, year of what a rep does when they work for a distributor.
Honestly, most of it's going to be, a lot of it at least, is going to be transporting instruments to and from surgeries, picking up equipment at a hospital, bringing it to another hospital, getting it into SPD, getting it out of an SPD, which again, it's a valuable tool. It's going to teach you where in the hospital to go, how to navigate the hospital systems. You're going to get to spend some time in the operating room, but it's going to be be seen and not heard. Be there with your mouth shut, watch and learn. Maybe you'll be lucky enough to be able to ask a doc some questions after a case, when you're sitting there, but you're kind of going to be at the whim of the senior rep who's really earned the right to be there, and they have that business. Your goal is to support them in any way you can. And if you have a really good distributor that you're working for, they might be able to send you to some corporate training programs where, one of the bigger companies or the mothership is going to, pay to have you come do a little bit of training, or send somebody in the field to do some training with you. But it's going to be a lot of homework on your own. You're going to get online manuals and things that you're going to have to study and probably take tests and get at least an 80 or better to go to the next module and the next module. So it's a lot.
And when you use the acronym SPD, if you can just for some of our listeners that are newer, what is that?
Sterile processing department. So when you bring your instruments into the hospital, they've got to get sterilized and cleaned. So you're going to go down to SPD, you're going to fill out cards, probably have pictures of your instruments just in case anything is missing. You can verify what you brought in versus what you take out. They'll prepare it, get it wrapped and get it sterilized and ready for the cases. And as a new rep, really what you're doing is we move equipment from hospital to hospital. Great example. I told you this earlier. I've been in 3 different hospitals, 3 different ORs, and dropped stuff off at 2 different places today with my distributor. We've just been running and gunning, and we still have 2 dinners to go to tonight. Yes, when you're new, you're going to do a lot of running around, but unfortunately it seems to never stop. 25 years in, and I'm still doing it.
So for your entry level guys that are essentially running, trays around, to the sterile departments, are there any, you know, um, relationships that they should be building, at that point? Are they basically at the direction of the territory manager, where it's like, just bring this here, kind of don't talk to anyone. I don't want you screwing anything up. I mean, because I've worked with reps that
Yep.
they own their territory. They don't want anyone screwing with it. And then there's other, TMs out there. They're like, no, I want you to start breaking in and getting relationships. So who would be some of those relationships that could be a good starting point if
Well, and you've got to get a feel for what your senior rep wants you to do. But SPD is honestly a great point. Those people have more access and control than you realize in hospitals. So, getting to know them, just being nice to them, being friendly to them, talking to them on the way in and the way out. I used to go down after cases were over with. I would go down and actually help them rebuild the instrument sets and make sure everything was in the tray in the right area where it was. They saw it as just such a huge benefit and they loved me for doing it. But the reality was I was learning my own system. I knew where every instrument went, whether it was an old worn out tray that didn't have pictures anymore, didn't matter. I had put those things together so many damn times that I knew where every instrument went in that set.
Awesome. And is there anyone you could think of off the top of your head? You don't have to give the last name, but a young rep just starting out that really kicked ass. And what did they do well?
Honestly, I've had so many of them. I worked with a young guy. His name was Dana. He had worked for like a big medical equipment company, selling like gloves and stuff like that. And he came in. He had never been in the OR. He just was eager. He wanted to learn. He did the old school. He had a notebook with him, a little journal, and he took notes everywhere he went. He asked questions and he wrote down answers. But then when he saw you, he would follow up on that question. He went and actually got an answer and dug down deeper. He didn't just ask it for the sake of asking. And that really, surgeons responded so well to that. They loved that, right? And he came in as a young guy, and I think it was 2.5 years before he was one of the top reps we had in the country.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's impressive.
And is now a VP of a company somewhere else.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
I mean, it gets back to what you were saying earlier, which is essentially, the intent listening, and being an active listener. I mean, he was taking notes, but same thing for me. It's the same thing. I mean, you're being attentive to what people are talking about and what they're asking.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Well, and here I am. I'll show you. It's 25 years later, and I still have my notebook everywhere I go. I ask questions and I take notes.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's awesome. No, that's great. And so for some of the listeners out there that, they have a good grasp, it seems that most of the candidates that I work with, they have an understanding, but what would you say comparing a typical, med device role versus a distributor role? If you could just break down and explain the distributor model to some of our listeners.
Sure. So, the distributor model, you're a small business owner as a distributor. And I think first and foremost, we have to understand that if we're managing distributors, anytime we're asking them to take a new product or to expose us to one of their surgeons, we're exposing them to a certain level of risk as a small business owner, because we're up against the status quo. What they're doing is comfortable. They have their relationships. They've got their products approved at hospitals. So for me to come in and ask them to pick up a new product line, they have to go get that approved, do the heavy lifting, probably have a surgeon use their capital with the hospital to try to get a new product line approved and get in there, justify why we're doing that. Whereas on the W-2 side, you've got a company that's giving you a salary, that's giving you benefits. As a manager, I have a little more control of a W-2 rep, right? Because I can hold that over their head and say, you got to go do this. Whereas a distributor, if I don't add value, they have no reason to put me in the bag or to ever take me out of the bag.
Right. And are there certain backgrounds that you typically like to hire from? Or like you mentioned, medical sales college, is it training or maybe a clinical background, maybe a nursing background, B2B? Is there anything you tend to gravitate to?
So for me personally, I love ex-military and ex-athletes because I find that one, they have a great work ethic, and two, they're coachable.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
and do you have to have a 4-year degree?
Most corporate companies are still going to say they want to see a 4-year degree. It just checks a box on your resume. But with a distributor model, it's much easier to break into a distributor without a degree. They're more concerned about, can you do the job?
Right. Right. Absolutely.
And then, you work the distributor model for, whatever it is, 6, 8 years, 10 years. Then the bigger corporate companies will overlook that degree because they'll say in lieu of a degree, what you have for experience.
Okay. And you guys, you're not 1099. Are you a 1099 with a lot of distributors that are working for you?
So right now, all of my distributors are 1099 distributors. Yeah.
Okay. Now, do they need to have ortho or spine experience to uh, to have a book of doctors that you're looking for?
For the most part right now, yeah, my distributors are guys, a lot of them I've known for a long time, so it makes it a little easier. But realistically, to do something with the products that I have, you've got to have those relationships where you know how to navigate approval committees at hospitals and VAC committees, or you've got surgeons that can do that for you. Um, but at a more of an entry level, you don't have to do that necessarily. You work for a distributor that's going to be able to do those things, and you're really just learning the products and drinking from a fire hose, learning how to navigate the hospital. Where's materials management? Where do I go to get a PO? How do I do that? um, it's very a lot more basic in your learning versus, from a managerial standpoint, if you're trying to manage distributors. Yes, I have to find guys that can turn business and turn it relatively quickly.
So, that's interesting because when you're comparing the W-2 model working for, say, a Medtronic or Boston Scientific, whoever else out there, versus the 1099 distributor model, you know, I know it gets challenging because
Yeah.
it's not the Wild West by any means, but when you're a W-2, the company technically, owns you.
Yes.
And as a 1099, you're essentially, you eat what you kill out there. So
Yep.
what are the challenges that you face, dealing with those 1099 reps that becomes a little, difficult?
Realistically, trying to make sure that we bring value. If I don't add value, they're not going to take me out of the bag. They're not going to present me to docs. They're just not going to want to work with me. So one thing I've always done with distributors, and some companies will frown on this, or they'll tell you, it's not our focus. But, if I have other product lines that I have no relationship to, but I know, like, geez, Joe, this fits your call patterns. It seems like a great product. I've got a few other distributors using it and they're doing really well with it. I'm going to introduce it to you because, again, you're a small business owner. My goal is to bring value to your business, even if it's not with my product line, as long as it's one that doesn't compete head to head with me. And especially if it's complementary, so maybe it opens a door and gets me in. So I've brought a lot of products to a lot of distributors that I had no skin in the game, but I know in turn, if I call you or I text you, you're going to get back to me because I've made you some money over the years.
Yeah, absolutely. And how does someone save me tomorrow? I'm down in Miami. Arthrex. I feel I have a lot of good ortho contacts. I could start my own distributor, ship down here. How does someone go about that if you want to just start your own? I mean, if I just say, hey, I want South Florida, and I approach Arthrex, so how would that look?
So realistically, all you have to do is, you want to set up an LLC. So you fill out the paperwork, pay the fee, get your LLC, and then you're off and running. Then it's just, do you have relationships at companies that are willing to give you the product, to give you a contract, or, maybe it's a carve out. I know 3 docs that I've got a good relationship with. So I can go to some of those companies and say, look, I can't take all of South Florida, but these 3 docs, I have their ear. And then, you pick up a couple of product lines, you start working with them. And if you have success with one product line, it's a lot easier to show that to another company when you're trying to earn their product line as well.
Okay, and I would assume that if someone else is already working with those doctors at Arthrex or whoever it is, they'll say, "Yeah, we got that covered for now. Like we need."
Often, yeah. So honestly, realistically, the best way to break in is with startups. You find a small startup company that's really hungry, looking to get market share, and you can say, "Look, I'm not the Arthrex guy, but I do have some relationships, and right now I just need something to go show them."
Awesome. Um, just to pivot a little bit, but staying on the distributor model, because many reps coming into the industry, a lot of the entry level roles, either office based, hospital based, calling on surgery centers. Explain to the audience, working whether it's a distributor or not, navigating the hospital space, especially since when me and you started years ago, where I remember just putting scrubs on and just walking in and
Yeah.
out of ORs. I mean, it was you could do whatever you want basically. But
Yep.
now dealing with vendor credentialing and how that looks and the challenges that faces.
It's changed so much. Like to your point, it used to be kind of the Wild West. You could throw on your scrubs and go in the OR. I could throw on my scrubs and go in a doc's office and say, "Hey, doc so and so just told me to come over." They see me in scrubs and they don't know, so they give me the appointment and they let me in. Um, Now none of that flies. And with vendor credentialing, you have to pay fees. If you're handling a large geography, you could spend a few $1,000s a year just on vendor credentialing services. And then you have some hospitals that use, like rep scrubs. So you've now got to pay $8 for paper scrubs every time you go in the OR. And half the time you open up the scrubs and you got two tops or two bottoms, or the crotch doesn't have the bottom doesn't have a crotch in it. I'm a big guy. That's a problem. So it's just so different to get access. And hospitals, when I first started, I had OR directors that would say, I would love it if you could talk to the doc at the scrub sink about this product or this, and that's wonderful. Now it's like you have to sign a contract some places that say you won't try to talk to doctors at the scrub sink or in the lounge, and you won't approach them in the hospital about new products. You'll only approach them outside of the facility.
And you bring up a great point with access. That's a hot topic, with reps that have been doing this 30 years or just starting today, where we know it's changed drastically over the years.
Yeah.
It's gotten tougher and tougher. So you're getting into that hospital, they're shut door. You can't get in. You can't see the doctor. He's a no-see doctor,
Yep.
quote unquote no-see. What are some of the other avenues that you've taken, to get your messaging across to that physician or his team?
So, I've tried to go through a PA from time to time. I'll see if I can find a PA that he works with that maybe it's a little bit easier to access them. They don't seem to have so much pressure. If I have any relationships in the hospital, sometimes circulating nurses, it's different if the OR is closed and I can't get into the hospital, period. But if it's just a doctor I can't get access to, I'll talk to their circulating nurses, their scrub nurses, their scrub techs, find out who might have that person's ear that I can, have a conversation with. When it's an account that's completely shut down and the doc's no access, the account's no access, that's a tricky one. If I had a really good answer there, I'd be making a lot more money.
Right. And so, it brings up the point too, when do you say when and say, you know what, I got to back off, time to focus on, lower hanging fruit out here.
Well, and so I look at it as like, sometimes it's my 80-20 or my 60-40, right? I spend 60 to 80% of my time on that lower lying fruit, things that I think can move the needle of business in the next 30 to 90 days. And then that other 20 to 40% of the time, it's more of my long-term approach. Like, hey, this hospital system, it's a bear. I know it takes 18 months to get approval there, but if I get approval, it potentially is $25-30 million a year market cap for me. So it's worth that 18 months of investment. But again, as salespeople, we have quotas, right? If I'm only focused on something that's going to pay off in 18 months, I probably don't have a job by the time we get approval. I need to move the needle on the revenue right now.
So that's a great point too, because I'm still not even that familiar, because every company is different.
Yeah.
I know in the hospital space, whenever I was meeting with reps or, interviewing when I was breaking into the space, one of my mentors back then was, Joe, find out the expectations.
Yep.
Especially in the hospital space, this isn't going to be like calling on Dr. Jones in his office where he can make a decision right then and there. So how do how do the expectations look in terms of timeline for getting products that you have no products used right now in a new hospital with a new doctor? What's the typical timeline to really be able to get in there and make an impact?
There's so much fluctuation and variation, Joe. So if it's a teaching facility, a big facility, it can honestly take over 2 years. It can be arduous, and there are so many landmines that you can step on in that process, and learning how to navigate that minefield. My best advice is look at your smaller community hospitals. They're going to have easier access. They're not getting the pressure that they are, at the big teaching institutions that have residency programs and fellowship programs. So, look at ASC. Surgery centers are a great way to, get access right now. Going out to surgery centers, your small community hospitals. I think those are probably your quickest access points to move the needle on revenue. You still have to go after the big institutions. You just have to understand, if you're spending all of your time there and the expectation is, hey, Joe, we want to see some new stuff within the first 6 months, and you're spending all your time at, a giant facility, it may take you 18 to 24 months to move the needle, and you don't have that time.
And because when I sold capital equipment, I used to sell a $2 million robot that was similar to like the Da Vinci robot.
Yes.
Are there certain levels, like for instance, in the cardiology divisions that I would call on, anything above 100,000 had to get approval outside a lot of the institutions in New York City. So they'd have to get outside approval outside the department. So are there any, revenue levels that you know of that once you get above 10, 20, 30, whatever it is, it's got to get approved by other leaders in the hospital? Is that the
Well,
same with distribution too?
yeah, and to your point on capital, typically I find the same thing. If it's over 100,000, you're now looking at capital budget cycles, and you've got to figure out when their fiscal year is and when that next budget cycle is, so you can get on that. With implants, most of my career has been in implants, and it's a little different, right? We fly under the radar to some degree. We go against the DRG, so a lot of hospitals have capitated pricing. So if you're going to come in, they already tell you we only pay X amount for this plate or for this screw or for a knee or a hip. This is all we pay because this is what our DRG is, and this is the carve out for implants. So it's a little bit different. Sometimes I think, though, you can, if you have a disposable product, $500 seems to be a really magical number. If you're under $500, you fly under the radar a little bit, even at $495. But at $501, you pop up on somebody's screen somehow, and you get attention. And then it's a line item. So let's say, it's an HSS and you break into a giant facility, it's great you're under $500 and it kind of flies under the radar. But if at the end of the year, they've done $3.5 million of your under $500 product, guess what? You're on somebody's radar.
You just brought up my next question, because that's what I was gonna. Because in my head, again, I'm a salesman at heart. I'm thinking, okay, I'll stay behind 495 today, and I'll be back tomorrow, and then the next day, and just
Yeah.
keep on your 495. So, would that get tracked monthly? Twice a year? Is it annual? Like that? Where you're?
I think it varies, but I know I've been hit on a quarterly notice. I've gotten a notice from a hospital like, hey, you just represented 7% of our spend this quarter. We need to talk. And annually, they definitely review budgets annually for sure. And they look at line items, and, depending on what your product is, if you are truly bringing clinical value or you're improving patient outcomes, at least you have a leg to stand on. But if it's really an ancillary product that's sort of a Me Too, and they're paying 20% more for your Me Too than they are for someone else's, you're probably going to be in trouble.
I'm just checking the time. Well, we're going to take a quick break right now. Just to, James, do we have any questions from the crowd?
We have not really many questions, but we have great service you provide to the up and comers in our space. We have Ryan Finley says, I have another view on entry-level break-in reps if you want to hear the comment. So if you want to send that comment over, we can go over it.
Please.
And Bethany says, I went to MSC.
Awesome.
That's all we have right now. If anybody has any questions, put them in the chat. And make sure you follow Joe on YouTube and hit like and subscribe and share if you like this content.
Awesome. So some of them, I collected a bunch of questions this week from candidates that said they wouldn't be able to make the call today. So
Okay.
I can find out. So again, we might jump around a little bit, but I'm just going to read them off. One of the things is it goes back to the actual resume. So resume gets brought in front of you, where do your eyes go? Are there sections? Is there something that you want to see on that resume that typical, quote unquote, good reps stand out?
Yeah, I love to see some accomplishments there. And if it's a new rep trying to break in, it's going to be different, right? Maybe it was academic accomplishments. Maybe they had athletics in their background or whatever it was, just something that shows they've been an above average performer at some form or fashion in their life. Now, I think at a different level, if I'm looking regional managers, regional directors, I try not to be, and I'm probably different than most, I try not to be too biased. I think a resume is just a piece of paper. So I don't want that to qualify or disqualify you necessarily. I'd rather have a conversation. I think a conversation for me is, let's at least say, all right, you check the boxes. So let's have a conversation, and then I can start to form an opinion.
Okay. And what about reps that contact you or try to contact you? They know, I call them up and say, hey, I got you an interview with Jason Bazemore next Thursday at 10 a.m. And they go out of their way. They either try to contact you via LinkedIn or somehow, through the generic CTM Biomedical email addresses. They figure out your email address and reach out to you just saying they're looking forward to the meeting next week, or is there anything I could prepare ahead of time? Like anything to show that they're going above and beyond. Is that frowned upon by you? Or is it something that you say, I like to see that they're showing that enthusiasm and excitement?
Double-edged sword. I
Okay.
know a lot of people will frown on it and say, I feel like they're stalking me.
Right.
For me, I think I would rather see it on the back end. Let's have that interview. But then I'd like to see, a notice on LinkedIn that you were on my profile, that you did your homework, that you did your background. Maybe during the call, let me know what you did for, research, whether it's on me, the company, where we are. And then I always love, personal follow-up and follow through. Again, I'm old school. I used to always write a handwritten thank you card and send that in after an interview. Everybody sends a quick email. Hey, thanks for your time. I would still actually go through the process of getting an address and physically mailing a thank you card.
That's a great piece of advice. I mean, one of the sales leaders that I've built a relationship, over the years, he had an interesting take on doing the research that I haven't tried myself, or I never asked reps, but I thought it was interesting. You're saying about seeing reps that have checked your profile.
Yeah.
So the way he would test them, he would say, "What was my previous role?" Not what's my current role. He said, what is my previous role? He goes, and it's just a simple, you know, everyone's going to look at where you're currently at.
Yep.
He goes, I just wanted to see if they just went a step further. He goes, not that I'm going to, totally blacklist someone if they don't know that. He goes, but it does show the individuals that really took it to the next level. So I don't know if you have any other little tests like that besides just checking the profile.
So I don't do a ton, but to your point, I've had more than one doctor when I've met with them and said, oh yeah, they said, where did I train? Where did I go to school? And you're a deer in the headlights, I was fortunate enough to, like I say, I'm a little bit of a geek. I like to look at those things. So when I've been asked that, I was able to tell them, well, here's where you went to med school. Here's where you did your undergrad, and, here's where's your residency, and here's your fellowship. And they kind of look back at you like, okay.
Yeah, but it's true though. I mean, it tests you, and,
Yeah.
and you gotta, you gotta do whatever you can to stand out because there's so many. I always looked at it as I would be obsessed with trying to do research about not just about the company so much, but about the individual that I'm meeting with and trying to find out his key or her key drivers because I always felt like someone else is going to be doing this.
Yep.
So if I don't do that, someone else is going to stand out, and if I can control it, it would I kick myself in the butt knowing afterwards, like, oh, why didn't I look that up or why didn't I search that a little bit deeper?
No, I agree with you completely. I think another thing too is the questions you ask on an interview, right? How you dig down and show that you have an understanding, especially if it's not an entry-level job. If you've already been in the business, asking what's going on in the territory, why is there turnover? Understanding what the dynamics look like with hospital approvals, where are we approved? Where are we not approved? For me as a manager, if I have somebody asking those questions, I say, they've done this. They know what they're doing. This isn't their first rodeo. They're probably going to be able to come in and assimilate what's happening here versus, someone that's kind of starry-eyed and just looking at you like, wow, I'm going to get to go in the operating room and wear scrubs. This is going to be like such a sexy job. And it's like, no, it's really not.
Well, this is actually something that I've gotten mixed reviews on when I speak with sales leaders. Some, because I believe in be as transparent as possible, especially the further you move down this interview process,
Yep.
And you get a rep. And I always, challenge my candidates to really push, to make this a two-way street where is this, find out what's realistic. If you find out that you have a $10 million quota,
Yeah.
And you have to do 3,000 surgeries in 1 year, and that's how you're going to get a good bonus. You got to start figuring out like, oh, this isn't possible, So some of the managers where they disagree, they're like, I wouldn't share so much during the interview process. I disagree with that. I'd be
Yeah.
upfront to see if they're up for the challenge. So what are your thoughts on that with candidates like really trying to do their homework and find out like, hey, is this doable? And am I getting myself into, jumping from the frying pan into the fire by coming here?
Well, if it's not your first job and you're not simply trying to get a foot in the door and just break in, because then you have to be a little bit less selective. And, maybe you do take that first job where your quota is 11 billion and it's unreal and you're not going to get your bonus, but you're paying your dues. Other than that, I would say my best advice to candidates is, you said it, it's a two-way street, right? You're not just interviewing for the job. you're interviewing that company to see if you actually want that job.
Right. Yeah. And that's what I agree with, you know. And what about reps contacting reps at the company to do due diligence? Is it something you're in favor of, or
I love it.
okay?
I love it. I really do. To me, that shows something. And especially if the rep they contact reaches out to me and says, hey, so-and-so reached out to me to pick my brain. And often when I'm interviewing, I will ask as part of my interview, I will have a candidate get on a phone call with one of my other reps and say, I want you to spend a half an hour picking his brain, hearing what a day in his life is like, what he or she is doing. I want you to have a full understanding, like you said, transparency, right? I want you to have a full understanding of what's going to be expected of you and what your peers will be doing. But then also I get great feedback from the rep that they spoke with on what their thoughts are.
So, and that's something that, I always wanted to know, because people give mixed reviews with that too, where I had reps when they would come to me and say, hey, Joe, this Susan girl reached out to me. The Susan girl reached out to me. The Susan girl reached out to me. When I have multiple reps doing that, I did like that. And I'm like, this person is really showing that they really want this job. Now, obviously, they got to meet other criteria and be a good fit, but the effort, and the hard work, when people throw that term around, oh, no one's going to outwork me. Well, you're showing me during the
Yes.
interview process that you're doing it, as opposed to just saying it. So your reps would share with you, you're saying they usually would get back to you and say, hey, this candidate reached out to me, correct?
I've had some, and then, like I say, others, I'll purposely set up that call so they can talk, because I want my reps, one, to feel like I value their feedback, but two, it's a great way of me mentoring a rep to get them ready to become a manager someday. I'm having them do some interviews, and talk to some other people, like talk to the candidate. And I ask them for their feedback. What are your thoughts? Do you think they can do this job? Do you think they have the right mentality? It's just all part of the development process for, getting reps ready to be managers, and managers ready to be area vice presidents, and area vice presidents ready to run the country.
And do you guys typically do ride-alongs as part of the interview process?
I've had companies where we've done ride-alongs, not as prevalent anymore, especially in device. It seems to be a lot less prevalent these days. It's more of a, let them talk to one or two reps, maybe even have them interview like with another regional director or regional manager somewhere, so I can, get some feedback from one of my peers that I trust and say, maybe I'm on the fence about a candidate, right? I'm just not sure. I want to have, Joe, I'm going to have you talk to this person as well, and then give me your feedback.
Now, if you do a ride along, because this is one of the questions that I've gotten from the crowd, what do you expect that, young rep, never been in an OR before, as green as can be, what would be advice you would give that rep of the interaction that you'd like to see?
Don't
Some of the
pass
do's
out.
and don'ts. Okay.
Don't faint in the OR. If you haven't smelled a bovie and the smell of burning flesh, it's different. So sometimes that first time in the OR, they get queasy. I'll never forget my first time with Stryker going to watch a procedure in the OR, and they were doing a total knee. We were doing like 3 cases in a row, and then we were supposed to have lunch. And the senior rep who was with me was kind of like, oh, let's see how this guy is. We're about 45 minutes into the first case, and they've got me standing over the back of the dock looking down, and he's like, so how are you feeling? I'm like, oh man, I'm starving. He's like, yep, he'll be fine.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
My first procedure, I actually saw a TMJ surgery at St. James Hospital in Newark, which no longer exists. And again, back then it was more Wild West. All you did is have to get approval from the chief of surgery, and I was just going from OR to OR. I saw a TMJ, and what got me wasn't the smell or the sight, it was the lights.
Yeah.
So that light, it's like a Yankee Stadium light in your face.
Yep.
And I started wobbling, and I didn't realize. And then the oral surgeon literally turned to me, goes, "You okay?" And I'm like, "Oh shoot!" He could actually tell that I'm getting dizzy. He goes, "Joe, why don't you just lean up against the wall?" And I went back up against the wall, and I took a couple breaths. But I was like, "Oh wow, I'm actually going to pass out in the OR." I was like so embarrassed. But it
Yep.
gets real if you never did it before. It's interesting.
It is. I've had people that have, really gotten faint or gotten to the point where they needed help to not fall down in the OR. And sometimes I think we build it up so much, it's almost anxiety, right? We build it up so much in our own head that we get in there and we panic a little bit versus, we all put our pants on one leg at a time, just like the person next to you. So at the end of the day, we're okay.
And getting back to the actual interview process, you mentioned questions. Are there any other questions that are quote unquote good questions to ask that you like besides just, about the expectations? It is something a little bit, I don't know if it's creative or just things that these are questions that I expect them to ask because they should want to know this.
I think one that I really like, and I've had a few candidates ask me, and it's always kind of resonated with me, is, um, you know, what is it you're looking to see in the next 6 to 12 months to know you made the right choice in this hire? So like, what am I going to expect of you as a rep? So like, give me, you talked about transparency. Give me what it is you're going to be looking for over the next 6 to 12 months to know that you made the right decision by bringing me on board.
Awesome. I like that. I mean, it's, sometimes we'd ask like, what does good look like in the next 6 months? But I like the way that they phrase that to make sure that, this is, you can be happy with the hire that you made. How does that
Yep.
look? Yeah. I
Well,
like the way they phrase that.
the first time it came to me, I was interviewing a young woman, and she said, Jason, tell me, what is it that's going to let you know 12 months from now you made the right decision when you hired me? And it was almost like an assumptive close on her part. And I was kind of like, oh, wow, I really like how she did that.
Yeah, that was good. That's good.
Yeah.
So that's another good segue, closing. Okay. Give me some examples or anything that stands out as what's a good close or what should they be asking? Because people ask different ways. Like I've had, do I have your approval to go on to the next round, or straight up asking, can I have the job?
Yep.
What are some examples that you think are good closes or ways that they should be asking that?
So lots of different ones. I think the worst thing is no close at all, right? So, it can be as easy as, so what are our next steps? What do our next steps look like in this process? One that I always appreciated, and I used to use myself, is, have you seen or heard anything that would make you hesitate moving me forward in this process? And if the answer is no, then what are our next steps and what are the timelines for those next steps?
That's great.
It shows me as a salesperson, as a rep, your job is to sell, right? You're pushing me towards a yes or towards a no. I mean, and sometimes no is not a bad answer, right? Maybe is a terrible answer. I'm going to waste a lot of time on a maybe. A yes is wonderful. A no is still okay, because then I don't have to waste any more time and I can move on to my next opportunity. But I really like that. Have you seen or heard anything that would make you hesitate moving me forward? And then if not, what are our next steps and what are the timelines?
What about reps because one of the biggest objections that I have to train reps with are the ones that I just want to get your point of view with this,
Yeah.
your advice. You're coaching a young rep. They don't have experience, but this company, for instance, says, we're just looking for a year to B2B experience, which they have, but it's a cardiology role, and you're getting other cardiology device reps that they're up against, and when you throw out that objection that's thrown out to you where, hey, Jason, I think you have a good background, but, you're going against reps with a lot more experience. What would be a way that you would handle that objection, or you could teach a young rep to handle that objection to do their best to still stand out?
I would say, one, so I believe in, empathetic communication, right? So don't dismiss it as like, I would say it's a valid point. You make a really valid point. I don't have the experience, so it's going to take a little time for me to develop that clinical acumen. And then I come back to, that's where you have the confidence and say, but once I've done that, I'll take their lunch. So acknowledging, one, yes, as an interviewer, you just pointed out that there's a little bit of a hole that I have, right? I don't have that experience. It's a valid point. I can't just dismiss you. I need to say, that's valid. I understand why you can see that and why that would be a hesitation on your part. It's going to take a little longer. I'm going to have to get the training. I'm going to have to develop a clinical acumen. But once I do, I'll run through walls for you, and I'm going to take everyone else's lunch.
I love it. I love it. That's great. I mean, my approach, which is a little different, but again, I love your approach, is talking about owning your own development. A lot of these young reps that just by verbalizing, what does that mean? It's not just waiting for the company to hand you another module,
Yeah.
or waiting for Jason to get back to me to teach me, about another case that I'm going to be going into next week for the first time. Like doing it on your own. I mean,
Yep.
there's so many resources. I mean, me and you had the freaking card catalog in the library back in the day that, a lot of these young guys don't even know what the hell that is, but there's so much information at your access that if it's at your reach, if you don't use it, you're just, you could just own your own development much better than we were able to back in the day. So, but I love your approach.
Well, no, absolutely. And to your point, like with ChatGPT now, even if you have no experience, you can ask some pretty specific questions and you could actually get, like, you could ask ChatGPT, what would I learn in my first year of cardiology sales that would set me apart from the competition? And you're going to get about a 2.5-page narrative that you just have to read and honestly study stuff like that. And if you're willing to do those little things, I think it's easy to overcome that, that lack of, I don't have the experience, but you're showing that the kind of drive and initiative that you have.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I've actually just started using Chat GPT in the past year.
Yep.
And I'm actually a big fan. I don't believe in if you had a paper due, you don't make it write your paper, but it's a great resource that that most reps should be using, because it can give you, like you said, it can give you that quick info, to just give you a little bit, a step ahead, in a quick manner.
Whenever my wife and I have a disagreement and I know I'm wrong, I use Chat GPT to still have a fighting chance.
How to save my marriage. Please write me a quick response in 3 to 4 sentences.
I actually, with her one night, I went into Chat GPT and I said, hey, I'm on the losing end of an argument with my wife. What can I do?
That's great. Well, I want to take another break just to see, James, if we have any questions from the crowd, anything for Jason to address.
We do. We have one from Bethany G. We were told to profile our surgeons, know their education and literature, to ask them about a publication if you hit a roadblock.
So
I don't know what the question is, but
well, I think probably just asking if that's a good thing to do. And I touched on that earlier. I think it's a great thing to do. I've had a couple surgeons ask me, where did I train? Where did I go to med school? It's a way of showing you've done your homework. And if they have published any papers, it's nice to know for a stroke of the ego, but more importantly, what was the paper they published about? It might give you some insights into the focus of their practice and where they're focused. And how does that align with what your organization has?
Awesome. Perfect. We're getting close to the hour here. There's no more questions right now, James. Just want to make sure.
No, not at the moment.
Okay, awesome. Jason, any parting thoughts for any of our reps that are, again, looking to break into this industry? Any parting advice for them that can help them get a step ahead?
Stay persistent. Do your thing, but stay persistent, stay on top of it. And it's an amazing field. It's an amazing, I've had a 25 plus year, amazing career. I've done some wonderful things. I've been blessed. And my plan is to continue to do it for as long as I can. And at a certain point, it's not about the money anymore. I just love what I do. And my wife tells me if I ever retired, I would drive her and myself nuts. So I have to keep working.
That's awesome. That's awesome. This has been a pleasure, Jason. I really do thank you. You're providing a lot of insight, especially with the distributor model, because this is an area where people say, yeah, I'd love to work for a distributor, but they really didn't have an understanding. But I think this gives them a much clearer picture, what they're getting into. And especially, being honest with them that, hey, you're not going to just be selling to doctors right away. You're going to have to earn your way up.
Yeah.
Running around like a mule your first year or so. I mean, that's part of it. So I think that's
Absolutely.
a great message because it's very realistic. But, I thank you again. This was awesome. Hopefully you can join us again. We could pick another.
I'd love to.
And, it's been a pleasure. And I want to thank everyone today for listening and joining us. Again, if you'd like to reach out, if you have any other questions for me or Jason, feel free to shoot me an email at joe@reppath.com. Or again, please, if you want to see a copy of this, go on Unfiltered Medical Sales Coaching on my YouTube channel. And lastly, for any of the members of the lobby, if you're on this call, we're offering a promo code for any discounts for coaching, anything moving forward, which is the code number 0721. So again, if you message me on LinkedIn or shoot me an email, just put in the promo code 0721 and you can get additional discounts for any lobby members that are on the call. But thank you guys again. Thank you, Jason. And you have a great day. Good luck with your dinners tonight, buddy.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Okay, pal.
Goodbye.
Take care.